Hey everyone! Today we're going to talk about an amazing time in Japanese history, the Edo period. This period lasted from 1603 to 1868, when the Tokugawa family ruled Japan. They made a lot of changes that still affect Japan today. The name comes from Edo, which is now Tokyo, where they had their government. So how did the Tokugawa family take control? It all started in 1600 with a huge battle called the Battle of Sekigahara. Tokugawa Ieyasu and his army from eastern Japan defeated a group of lords from western Japan. That battle ended over 100 years of fighting. In 1603, Ieyasu got the emperor to officially name him shogun, which made him the most powerful leader in Japan. The emperor didn't have much power, but his approval made Ieyasu's rule look official. Instead of getting rid of all the other warrior families, Ieyasu let them keep their land, but only if they accepted him as their leader. The Tokugawa family controlled about 30% of Japan's land, and the rest was given to about 270 different daimyo, means local lords. The ones who had always supported Ieyasu got smaller but important areas, while those who joined him later got bigger lands, but they were far from the center of power. To make sure the daimyo stayed loyal, the Tokugawa government made strict rules. Daimyo weren't allowed to have big armies, and they could only have one castle. From the 1630s, they also had to spend every other year living in Edo, and their families had to stay there all the time. This way, even if they wanted to rebel, they wouldn't risk harming their own families. The Tokugawa also set up a strict class system. At the top were samurai, who made up about 7% of the population. Below them were farmers, artisans, and merchants. This system was meant to keep order and prevent too many people from having weapons. They also decided to cut Japan off from most foreign countries. Europeans had started arriving in the 1500s to trade and spread Christianity, but the Tokugawa were afraid they might help people rebel. So they banned Christianity and only allowed the Dutch to trade, and only in Nagasaki. With the country finally at peace, Japan's economy started growing. Between 1600 and 1720, the population doubled from 15 million to 30 million. Farmers could focus on growing food instead of worrying about war. Daimyo also needed more money, so they worked on improving their lands with better farming methods, irrigation, and cash crops like cotton and silk. Trade grew, and a strong economy developed across Japan. As business and trade increased, cities got bigger. Towns formed around castles, and Edo, Osaka, and Kyoto became major cities. Edo became Japan's political center and had over 1 million people, making it the biggest city in the world at the time. Osaka was the main business center, and Kyoto remained the home of Japan's traditional arts and culture. As cities grew, a new kind of culture developed. Entertainment districts, called pleasure quarters, became important social spots. These places were tough for the women who worked there, but they helped create a new entertainment world called ukiyo, or the floating world. This inspired new art styles like ukiyo-e woodblock, prints, and new types of theater, like bunraku, means puppet theater, and kabuki. Writers like Chikamatsu Manzemon wrote plays about everyday life. Ihara Saikaku wrote stories about city people, and Matsuo Basho became famous for his haiku poetry. By the 17th century, Japan was not just politically stable under the Tokugawa shogunate, it was also going through big changes in how people thought. Before this time, most people followed Shinto and Buddhism, but Confucianism, especially a version called Neo-Confucianism, started to become popular. Neo-Confucianism came from China, and was based on traditional Confucian ideas mixed with Buddhist and philosophical beliefs. A Chinese thinker named Zhu Xi helped shape it into a system that focused on human nature, ethics, and society. One of the main ideas in Neo-Confucianism was that people are naturally good, but daily life can distract them from that goodness. To stay on the right path, people needed to study and practice good behavior. While Confucianism had been in Japan for a long time, it was during the Edo period that Neo-Confucianism became a well-known philosophy on its own, separate from Buddhism. At first, the Tokugawa government was unsure about this new way of thinking. Since Christianity had been banned in the 1620s, leaders worried that Confucianism might also be a foreign threat. Over time, however, independent scholars started teaching Confucian ideas. Some people believed Confucianism was just a way to keep the strict class system in place, but it also influenced discussions about government and society. Unlike in China, where Confucianism was part of the government system, Japan's leaders were military rulers, and any challenge to their power was not welcomed. One scholar, Yamaga Soko, wondered what role samurai should have now that Japan was at peace. Since they were no longer fighting, he believed samurai should focus on both military training and education, to set a good example for others. Some of his ideas upset the government, and he was temporarily exiled. However, other Confucian scholars, like Ogyu Sorai and Arai Hakusuki, gained respect and even became advisors to shoguns. One major problem for Japanese scholars was that traditional Confucian beliefs said China was the center of civilization, with other countries being less important. Some Japanese scholars accepted this, but others argued against it. By studying Japan's ancient texts using Confucian methods, they claimed Japan was just as great, if not greater, than China. This thinking, called kokugaku, or national learning, led to early Japanese nationalism. In the early 18th century, an event called the Akko Incident became famous. In 1701, a lord named Asano Naganori attacked a government official, Kira Yoshinaka, inside Edo Castle. Kira was only slightly injured, but violence in the shogun's court was a serious crime. Asano was ordered to commit seppuku, and his lands were taken away, leaving his samurai without a master, turning them into Ronin. 2 years later, 47 of these Ronin took revenge by attacking Kira's home and killing him. They then brought his severed head to Asano's grave and waited to be arrested. Although they were seen as loyal warriors, the government couldn't allow people to take the law into their own hands. After an investigation, the 47 Ronin were also ordered to commit seppuku. This showed that while honor and loyalty were respected, maintaining order was the government's top priority. By the mid-18th century, Japan's population stopped growing and stayed at about 30 million. People had fewer children to keep their standard of living, and natural disasters and famines made life harder. At the same time, Japan remained mostly closed off from the world, but it still received some outside information. Dutch traders in Nagasaki gave reports about global events, and in the 1720s, Shogun Tokugawa Yoshimune allowed foreign books to be imported. This led to Rangaku, or Dutch learning, which introduced European science and medicine to Japan. Even with these new ideas, foreign threats were increasing. During most of the Edo period, Japan had kept European powers away, but by the late 18th century, foreign ships started showing up more often, asking to trade. At first, Japan rejected these requests. However, events happening in the rest of the world made it clear that Japan couldn't stay isolated forever. The Industrial Revolution in Europe brought big improvements in technology, such as steam engines and better weapons. When Britain defeated China in the Opium War of the 1840s, it showed that Western countries had much stronger militaries. In 1853, U.S. Commodore Matthew Perry arrived in Japan with powerful steam-powered warships and demanded that Japan open its ports. The Bakufu had no choice but to agree, signing a treaty with the U.S. in 1854. More treaties followed with Britain, Russia, and France. Many Japanese people saw the shogunate's inability to resist foreign powers as a sign of weakness. Two powerful domains, Satsuma and Choshu, led the opposition against the government. They argued that the emperor should have full power, not the shogunate. Their slogan, Sono Joy, revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, reflected both a sense of national pride and anger at the government. Some groups attacked foreigners, but Western navies responded by bombarding Japanese ports, proving that fighting them was not an option. Realizing that change was needed, opposition groups worked harder to remove the shogunate. After a brief civil war, the last shogun, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, gave up his power in 1868 and returned authority to the emperor. This was called the Meiji Restoration, ending over 250 years of Tokugawa rule and beginning a new period of modernization in Japan. For many years, Western historians saw the Edo period as a time of strict rule and isolation that led to Japan's militarism in the 20th century. However, views have changed. Today, people recognize the Edo period as an important time in Japanese history, when culture, government, and the economy developed in ways that still influence Japan today.